This is the lecture on healthcare and socialized medicine. What I'll be doing is covering 5 different subjects. First I'll do socialized medicine, then I'll do drugs, body parts, third, fourth, the breast milk controversy, and fifth, the question of inoculation. Should we force people to have inoculations against their will, and if so, under what conditions? So I want to start first with socialized medicine. What's going on with socialized medicine? It seems that we've learned either nothing or very little or maybe negative from what happened with the Soviet Union. You'd think once the Soviet Union went belly up and once Germany, the Berlin Wall fell, we would realize that socialism isn't really the way to go. Now it's true, the socialists are always saying, well, it's nothing wrong with the system, it's just that they didn't have the right socialists in charge, which is hard to see because they had many different socialist experiments from North Korea to East Germany, East Europe, Soviet Union, African countries, Cuba, everywhere it's failed. And yet, the premise seems to be socialism failed, let's try socialism with medicine. It's hard to really understand the thinking of people. And it's not just that we have experimental evidence or experimental indications that socialism failed. We have good and sufficient reason to know why it fails, and that's the socialist calculation debate, the Mises part or the Austrian part, that without prices to indicate what's going on, we can't rationally plan. Hayek stresses information, which I think is less important. There are incentives, there's profit and loss. There are all sorts of reasons why whenever we try socialism, even in the post office it doesn't work, the Motor Vehicle Bureau it doesn't work. And yet we want to entrust this system that has failed and failed again to something pretty important, healthcare. So it's very difficult to understand. And nor is it true that it only fails under commies. It fails here too. I mean, the post office, the Motor Vehicle Bureau, places like that, the roads, human beings are human beings. The Russians weren't stupid. I mean, they had some real good chess grandmasters. They got to, the Yuri, whoever it was, got up to the moon. I didn't get to the moon, but he was the first one to get up into space. And so, they're not totally dumb. And it's not that, we're smart and they're dumb and we can tolerate socialism. They can't. It's just that socialism doesn't work. Now, the objection is, well, healthcare is different. Medicine is the exception to the general rule. And I really don't buy that. I don't see that socialism is an exception. Yes, medicine is important, but so are other things: food, clothing, shelter. Now, here I'm really committing the fallacy that Adam Smith warned against, comparing all of diamonds and all of water. Right? When you compare all of diamonds and all of water, water is more valuable. The reason diamonds are more valuable is we do a marginal thing. But the way these people are doing it, I'm just sort of following them for argument's sake. Arguendo, suppose Adam Smith was wrong and we can forget about the marginal analysis just for a second. I hope Murray doesn't hear this because he'll say, no, you can't do that. But just comparing food, clothing, and shelter and medicine, medicine isn't the top one, or healthcare. Food, if we don't have food, we die in a couple of days. All of us. Whereas if we don't have medical care, most people in this room are 20 years old. You're not going to need any health care. It's just old duffers like myself that, well, I don't need it right now. But so food is more important than medicine. And if we should have, in other words, if you base it on the importance of the thing, whether you should have socialism or not, well, then we should have food socialism more than medical socialism. Clothing, well, we could have a nudist camp here, a nudist week, and we wouldn't need clothing. It's pretty warm. It just turn down the air conditioner, we'd be okay. So if you're going to have socialism based on the importance of the thing itself, well then clothing beats it, and shelter. I mean, it's raining out there. So I would say that if you had to do it strictly in that way, which again is a fallacy, healthcare only comes in fourth. So if you want to have socialism, Obama, let's have it for the big 3 first, and then we'll get to this, which is silly because we don't favor socialism for anything. But I'm just trying to take their arguments and take their arguments to their logical conclusion and show that it doesn't work. Okay, now you're not supposed to make money off of people's needs. That's the next one. People come in, they're sick, and you capitalist exploiting pig, you're taking advantage of their needs. Well, but we take advantage of people's needs every time they go into a grocery store or a restaurant. The people don't go into a restaurant unless they're hungry, and the restaurant is taking advantage of their hunger. So based on that, we shouldn't have prices for any of the things that people have a need for. A more proper way to see it is, of course, you're taking advantage of their needs, and you're satisfying their needs, and what's so bloody wrong about that? The next one is, well, if we had socialized medicine, we could get around administrative costs. the cost of collecting healthcare and billing and stuff, but that goes for everything. I mean, these chairs here that you're sitting on have administrative costs. So if administrative costs are the key, that are so onerous that we have to have government tax money and then give it away to people for free, well then nothing should be in the market. Everything should be socialist. Okay. I would say about healthcare, too important to leave to the market, that if you have to have government do things, and I'm a moderate, I'm not against government and everything, I'm kidding here. Well, sometimes I say, the government should exist and should have one function, and that is to compel everyone to read Man, Economy, and State. But apart from that, if you have to have government, let's have government for unimportant things like paper clips and rubber bands and toothpicks or something like that. They're going to screw it up, so you might as well screw that up rather than screw up something important. So the argument cuts against these guys that if it's important, somehow the government has to do it. No, if it's important, you have to leave it to free enterprise. Then we have the problem of moral hazard, where you take less care of yourself when it's given away for free. You don't worry so much if your house is fully insured for, say, fire than if it's not insured at all and there's a forest fire coming. If you're fully insured, you just sort of leave. If you're not insured at all, you try to stay and maybe keep the place watered or something like that. Well, you get a similar sort of a thing with healthcare. If it's going to be for free, then people aren't going to take care of themselves as well. They'll do more smoking, hang gliding, whatever it is that they'll do to put themselves at risk. But then we, the government, have to come after you and make sure that you don't do that because you'll screw up the system. So when you have socialized medicine, you have all sorts of implications for lack of freedom. Did you brush your teeth? Did you drink your milk? The government's going to come around and check on you. And it's okay for 3-year-olds, but, we're supposedly adults here. Another problem is some 50% of expenses on medical care are used for the last 6 months of life under the socialized medicine system that we now have, and we have partially socialized medicine. Is this the way that we would do it if we were free to choose? Well, I'm not sure. I think maybe not. People wouldn't spend 50% of their medical services on the last 6 months of life when the life isn't that good and you're sort of on the way out. But they should be free to do that if they want. And then you have the opposite thing in Europe where they're I don't know if it's true or not, but whether smoke there's fire maybe, they're accused of killing people in the last 6 months of life earlier than they need be killed in order to make savings because the expenses are so big. Another problem is you have long queues. Whenever you have a zero price for something, the demand is much greater than the supply. And let's see if I can... Oh, here we go. If this is the supply and that's the demand, at a zero price, the quantity is much greater than the amount given. It just sort of follows from basic supply and demand. So you're going to have long queues, long waiting lists. You're going to have excess demand. People are going to want it more at a zero price. It's just an ordinary human condition that when the price is zero, you treat it at zero. I mean, if shirts were like this for zero, you wouldn't wash them. You just sort of throw them away and get another one. And if medical care is like this, as it is, well, then you're going to get long queues. In Canada, we have this situation where there are long waiting lists for various kinds of services. Can you see this in the back? No? Okay, well, I'll read it to you. I really can't pronounce most of these things, but the average waiting list in Canada for the various services, orthopedics, 25 weeks, plastic surgery, 20 weeks, ophthalmology, 22 weeks. Well, I won't read the whole thing, but the average is about 25 weeks for waiting lists. And this is very problematic. Let me read a very poignant letter about this waiting list business. Here is a letter from a Canadian woman. My sister and her husband own and operate a cattle ranch in southwest Saskatchewan. On this ranch, they have several saddle horses. About 3 years ago, one of her horses became ill and was in obvious distress. She took it to the nearest vet clinic where it was diagnosed with gallstones, apparently a very painful condition for horses as well as people. The vet recommended that the horse be operated on as soon as possible. My sister left the animal with the vet, who operated him on that very night. My sister picked up the horse 3 days later, took it home. After a couple of weeks of rest, the horse was as good as new. At about the same time, my sister's friend in the city of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, was also diagnosed with gallstones, and the doctor recommended that she be operated on as soon as possible. There is one glitch in this. As soon as possible in Saskatchewan's Medicare system means 18 months. So this 35-year-old mother of two had to put her life on hold, endure several trips to the emergency room whenever she had an attack. She could not afford the ambulance, not covered by Medicare, so she had to take a cab every time she had one, and there she sat in an emergency room for several hours until they gave her a bunch of powerful painkillers and sent her home. All this severely curtailed her enjoyment of life, as you can well imagine. After 18 months, she was operated on. And here is the punchline. My sister pointed out that if she had made her horse wait 18 months, she would have been found herself in front of a judge answering charges of cruelty to animals, and rightfully so. No one would do that to an animal, but apparently it is acceptable to do that to humans in Canada. And this is the system that Obama is trying to foist upon us, and it's problematic, to say the least. Okay, so what is the free market answer to healthcare? Well, the free market answer to healthcare is the free market. You just have a free market and everything will run fine. Case closed. My lecture is over. No, I'm kidding. There'll be no problems. I mean, we don't have any problems in the refrigerator industry or in the chair industry or in the wristwatch industry, and we wouldn't have any problems in any industry that free enterprise worked on. But since I have another 45 minutes to go, I might as well say a few more things. The problem is with Medicare is that, or with healthcare is that it's so expensive. I mean, if it were really cheap, if it cost as much as a banana or an apple or something, there wouldn't be any crisis. But it's very expensive. Well, why is it so expensive? The main reason that it's so expensive is that the AMA is the strongest union in the U.S. They're really a labor union, although they're not seen as a labor union, but that's the way they function. Now, I'm not a real big fan of Milton Friedman. But in this, his Chapter 9 in Capitalism and Freedom is a magnificent chapter. I recommend that highly to you. And and my next couple of minutes will be based on what he says. What they do is they restrict entry. The number of medical student applications compared to acceptances to medical school is horrendous, 20 to 1, 30 to 1, things like that. And it's not as if people who are very stupid are applying to medical school and, that they can't add, they can't subtract, they're a bunch of morons, and, obviously they shouldn't go to medical school if you can't, tie your shoes. But these are very bright people who just can't get into medical school. Ronald Hamway did a wonderful book, Canadian Medicine, a study in restricted entry. And what they do is they just restrict people's entry into medical school, and as a result, the salaries that doctors get are much higher than the salaries that other people get. Can you see this? I don't know if you can see this in the back, but physicians and dentists, this is as of 2002, and I think these numbers are all too low, but I think they're relatively equally too low, so they're a good comparison. Physicians are right up at the top of the list with $160,000 a year. I have a cousin who's a doctor, and he says he makes around $700,000 a year, but he has to pay off nurses and he has to pay off malpractice and stuff, and he takes home around $350,000 a year. And this was several years ago. So I think these numbers are a bit low, but the key is the comparison. And what I'm comparing it with is not CEOs or airline pilots or judges, but rather biologists and veterinarians. Why am I comparing with biologists and veterinarians? Because my theory is that if you're good enough to get a PhD in biology or to become a veterinarian, you're good enough to go to medical school and become a doctor. So look at what the doctors are getting compared to the biologists. They're getting roughly 3 times as much and 2.5 times as much for veterinarians. Look, an animal and a person are not that different biologically speaking, in the sense, if it has a broken arm, it's similar. And I think without too much of a leap of faith, we can say that a person who could be a vet could be a doctor with different kinds of training. Okay, now Milton Friedman has a whole litany of what's going on here. How do they restrict entry into medicine? First of all, you can't just start a new medical school. I mean, suppose I want to start the Walter Block Medical School. I go to jail. I have to get the AMA's permission. And the AMA, Ron Hamway has all these wonderful quotes at the Flexen Report in the turn of the last century at that time when the doctors were very open. We don't want too many doctors ruining prices. Because they were good economists. They realized that when supply shifts to the right and there are more doctors, there's less money for every doctor. And they want to keep the salaries up. How do they restrict entry? Well, first, in order to become a doctor, you have to be a citizen. Or to get into medical school, you have to be a citizen. Well, what the hell has that got to do with anything? Foreign doctors can't take care of you? Then there's the point that the exams have to be in English. And this is wonderful. Now, you can see that there's some reason. I go in and I say, you're the doctor, Jonathan, and my elbow hurts, and you start operating on my knee. And, that's not good. You have to have some communication between the doctor and the patient. But do you have to know English? No. You don't have to know English because of 3 things. First of all, some patients are unconscious. You come in and you're unconscious. You don't have to talk to the guy. You just sort of sniff around or look at his blood pressure or whatever it is you do. I don't know, hit his knee and see if it goes like that. I don't know what you do. I'm no doctor. I have a doctorate, but not in medicine. So if it's an unconscious patient, you just sort of deal with the unconscious patient without language. The second one is translators. That's why God invented translators. So that, now it'll cost a little bit more, but it should be up to people whether they want to have translators or not. Now, the point that Milton Friedman makes is that there were two epochs of mass immigration of people. Germany in 1933 to 1938, and Cuba in the 50s. And in both cases, in the German case, there were a lot of Jews who were emigrating from Germany. And the Jewish Vienna doctor at that time was supposedly the best doctor in the world. And the number of new medical entrances between 28 and 33, when there was not much immigration, and 33 and 38 was the same. Namely, hardly any of these Jewish doctors from Vienna were able to become doctors. Whereas there were people from Vienna who were immigrating to the U.S. in other fields, equally intelligent to doctors, physicists, chemists, mathematicians, economists, and they all got jobs. Whereas the Jewish doctors had to become cab drivers or something, or whatever else they could do because they couldn't become doctors. And a similar thing happened with the immigration in Cuba, from Cuba to the United States. There was a big immigration, and it wasn't the poor people from Cuba, the boat people that came later. This is very intelligent people from Cuba, and the physicists and the chemists and the veterinarians, and I'm not sure about the veterinarians, but the physicists and the chemists and the mathematicians and the economists from Cuba all got jobs, prestigious jobs in their field. The doctors from Cuba didn't. There was when my kids were young, my son was friends with a Korean kid, and the Korean kid's father was a doctor, and the father was running what do you call it, washing machine things or something. I mean, it was really pathetic. The guy was a doctor in Cuba. He could practice in Korea. He could practice in Korea, but he couldn't practice in Canada. Canada is the same thing as the United States in this regard. So what they do is they restrict entry, and when you restrict entry, the price is very high. I've got a lot to say, so I'm not going to take questions until the end. Okay, another problem with the present system is they run interns ragged, sometimes 24 hours in a row, 48 hours in a row. I don't know if this is still prevalent, but at least it was at one time, which shows that they don't have much care for the patient. I mean, if I were to stay up 48 hours, I would just sort of, I'm not worth much, and I assume it's the same thing for everyone. They block osteopathy and chiropractic and homeopathy. Nurse practitioners, they try to make sure that they do as little as possible so that the demand for their services is greater, which means fewer medical man-hours. They don't testify on malpractice against each other. There's this code of honor or whatever. I'll get to malpractice later. So as a result of these restrictions, their salaries are much higher. How do they get away with this? Well, one reason that they get away with it is we have a greater concentration of people as producers than as consumers. As producers, most of us produce just one thing. Medical services, economic services, cab services, whatever. Unless you work for Heinz, and then they have 57 products. But forget about that. Most people just produce one thing. And even if you work for Heinz, you probably just produce one thing. You just do the lima bean soup, you personally. Or you're a lawyer for Heinz, or something like that. So as a producer, we just produce one thing. As a consumer, we consume how many things in a year? 10,000 different things? So we're very concentrated as producers, whereas consumers, we're sort of disparate. So when the producers of rubber bands come to Washington, D.C. for a subsidy, and it'll mean just 10 cents each from all of us, and they come and, it'll be big bucks for them, they'll get it. They'll wine and dine, they'll bribe. Whereas if we want to write a letter, it'll cost 43 cents plus the time, $5, and it's only 10 cents a year we're going to lose, so we have no incentive to fight them. That's why you get all these subsidies for businesses, or one of the reasons. Well, it's the same thing for doctors. A doctor's whole life is doctoring, or whole professional life is doctoring. Whereas the rest of us, how often do we go to a doctor? Well, when you're my age more, when you're your age less, but pretty much not 100%. So we have much less of an incentive to go down and testify. And what the hell do we know about medicine anyway if we testify? The doctors will say, well, what medical school did you go to? And you say, well, I didn't go to any medical school, and you're sort of dismissed. So that's why we have this problem. And, labor services is about 3/4 of the GDP. That's what labor gets, and it's roughly the same. I'm not saying doctors are the only labor force in healthcare, but they're a big part of it, and nurses are the other part, I guess, or orderlies. So what I'm trying to say is if we had a free market and we had free entry, we'd have many, many more doctors than we now have, and medical service would be a lot cheaper, and there wouldn't be this horrendous crisis, 43 million Americans aren't covered, yak. Well, 43 million no one has food insurance. Right? No one has clothing insurance. Now, ordinarily, what you have, if you have housing insurance, it's if your house burns down. You don't have housing insurance if your window breaks. For your car, you might have car insurance if you hit someone or if the whole car gets totaled, but you don't usually have insurance to change your oil. Right? But in medical, you have insurance that, I have a hangnail, fix it up. It's covered by insurance. Probably, I predict, although you can never tell for sure, but I predict that if we had a free enterprise in medicine, it would only be for this horrendous thing that costs zillions of dollars, but not for an annual checkup that right now might cost $150, but under more reasonable economics might cost $15. Who's going to have an insurance for $15? Okay, now one objection to this is, before the injection, let me just talk about the butter margarine thing. Early days when margarine first came out, it sort of looked grayish, yucky color. And the margarine people wanted to color it yellow so that people would buy it. And guess who was against the margarine people coloring margarine yellow? You people are way ahead of me. The butter interest. And they would say what's in the public interest, which is obviously, you can see right through it. You can see that it's in their interest that the margarine people not compete with them. And one way to compete is to colorize it. Well, it's the same thing with doctors. It's not the public interest, it's their own personal interest. Okay, some objections. Jack the Ripper doctor. You come into his office and he chops your head off or something. Or whatever he does. What you do, the objection, if we don't have licensing under the AMA, the quality will fall apart and we'll have doctors who are incompetent. Well, what Milton Friedman says is that you don't have to have licensing. Licensing is if you don't pass the thing, you can't practice. You can have a thing called certification, which means that if you don't pass, you just can't call yourself a doctor. But you can call yourself a healthcare whatever or something else. And if people want to go to that, then they go to that. Take the case of thalidomide. Thalidomide was a wonderful drug for morning sickness. Women are coughing their guts out in the first 3 months of the first trimester of their pregnancies. They take thalidomide and they're not coughing. Unfortunately, you have birth defects. Now, the FDA, the German FDA, approved of this stuff. The American FDA didn't disapprove of it, so it was used all around the world. Did the FDA go broke? Stupid question. None of these people go broke. The point is that if you had certification, if you had the ACME certification agency, and they certified a doctor who was not a good doctor, not only would the doctor not be practicing, but the ACME certification agency would now go broke. And you say, well, we can't have that. I mean, how about that one person that got maltreated? Well, look, perfection is denied us on this side of the Garden of Eden. There are always going to be mistakes. There are doctors who pass the licenses who are incompetent. A few, very few, happily. You're always going to have mistakes. That's why they put erasers on the back end of a pencil. The question is not will you have mistakes. The question is do you have an automatic weeding out system such that if you make mistakes, you lose out? Well, when the AMA or the FDA determines quality, if they make a mistake, they don't go broke. They don't get removed. Whereas if you had a certification agencies, and I don't mean certification is like Moody's and Standard & Poor and Fitch. Previously, I would have used that as an example, but we now know that they're in the league with the government, and that's why they didn't. That's why they were giving AAA ratings to these junk bonds or things that turned out to be junk bonds. But I'm talking about a real market agency where you're allowed to go broke, where Chrysler and Ford and GM and all those would go the way that Packard went. Namely, I'm saying if we had a free enterprise system, it would work much more rationally and reasonably. Okay, what I've now done is I've done problems on the supply side. I'm trying to say that the big problem is the supply of doctors. If we had triple the number of doctors and doctors were paid a third of what they're paying, I'm not saying that it would be triple 1/3, but to use it as an illustrative number, if we had triple the number of doctors and doctors instead of being paid what they're paid are now paid a third of what they're paid, a big part of the problem would go away. It would be, no big crisis. I mean, we don't need McDonald's insurance for McDonald's burgers, and if a doctor were as cheap as a McDonald's or maybe a little higher, the next level up from McDonald's, there'd be no crisis. Okay, so that's the supply side of it. The next is the demand side. Well, suppose we had milk socialism of the sort that they want to promote health socialism. That is, the government collects, we don't buy milk, milk is free, the government taxes us for milk, and then we have all the milk we want. What will we do? Well, milk baths are supposed to be better for you than ordinary baths. People would take milk baths. Little kids, instead of having water gun fights, milk gun fights. Namely, when the price of something is zero, you use it as a zero, and you act rationally. I mean, look, we breathe in air. When somebody finishes a marathon and is going like this, nobody comes up to him and say, citizen, have some respect for other people. You're breathing in too much air. Well, air is free, so you can pig out on air, and nobody says squat, that you shouldn't be hogging up all the air. Well, if something is priced at zero, that means that there's plenty of it around, and you should use it rationally and have milk gun fights and milk baths, and then we'll run out of milk. And then we'll have to ration it. And then we'll have long waiting lists for milk. Whereas right now, there's no milk crisis. Well, the government is screwing it up a little bit, but not so badly. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is this business of medical malpractice. The medical malpractice thing is really weird. Maria, what does your malpractice cost? $25,000 to $30,000 for her. She's a, what do you call it, doctor? Emergency. Other specialties have either higher or lower, and baby delivery is much higher. And I think my cousin pays like $50,000 a year in medical malpractice, and $80,000 is not unknown. What's going on here? What's going on here is that the doctors have to. You come in with a hangnail, and they're going to start x-raying your whole body and give you an MRI on your nose or something because, God forbid, the hangnail is connected to... I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is that if you're a doctor and you're ready to be sued, and doctors are sued at the drop of a hat, oh, I don't like the way, this worked out, my hangnail. It's still bothering me. I'm suing you for $1 million because it's my hangnail. And now the doctor has to defend, and it costs a lot of money, lawyers, and instead of doctors taking care of people, they're worrying about defending. And so what they do is they order all sorts of tests. Oh, I'm in court. Oh, yes, I had the XYZ test, the ABC test, the yak. Because if you don't do this, you're an incompetent doctor. So you come in for, whatever it is, the hangnail, and you're having tens of thousands of dollars worth of tests. Now, how is that helping medicine? It's not. Now, you get this guy, Richard Epstein, this bum. Richard Epstein, you see, I don't mind anti-free enterprise people. They're okay. They pat their dogs. But what really bugs me is when they pose as free enterprises. Now, Richard Epstein is probably one of the most famous now that Robert Nozick has passed away. Would you say? He's perhaps one of the most famous libertarians in the country. I've tangled with him on, Eminent Domain. There's stuff in the NYU Law Journal. What's his latest thing? His latest thing, quote, a national cap on damages. You can sort of see what he's saying. Right now the damages will be $5-10 million, and there are studies that 1/10 of the studies are wrong. The awards are wrong. That they either gave awards when they shouldn't have, or not when they should not have, or the type 1 and type 2 errors. So you can see where he's coming from. If we cap it, then medical malpractice insurance rates will come down, and then there'll be fewer unnecessary exploratory whatevers, MRIs, CAT scans. But this isn't free enterprise. Free enterprise isn't an arbitrary government cap on anything. He should know better. What is the free enterprise solution to the medical malpractice? The free enterprise solution to medical practice is private contracts between consenting adults. So I'm a doctor, and I say, look, if you want me to treat you, you can't sue me. And you have to sign here, you can't sue me. I don't care if I leave my stethoscope in your stomach after I close you up. You can't sue me, period. If I leave my stethoscope in your stomach, you come back, I'll take it out for free. I'm a nice guy. But you can't sue me. And now I don't have to have any medical malpractice. On the other hand, this other doctor over here says, I believe in medical malpractice, and I'm going to charge you an arm and a leg for operating on your hangnail. And now people will choose what they want. That's the free enterprise solution. Freedom. And I predict, not as an Austrian economist, but just as a philological economist, that most people, when offered $10 for a hangnail with no medical malpractice and $1 zillion for the hangnail with medical malpractice, are going to consult the Harvard or the Mayo Clinic certification agency or the Johns Hopkins certification agency and say, well, this guy is certified by all three of those. I'll trust him with my hangnail. And then there's no crisis because the prices are very much lower. Okay, I'm now finished with my section on socialized medicine. The next thing I do is drugs. What's going on with the drug situation? What's going on with the drug situation is that next week I'm going to get organized and I'll be dangerous. Here we go. What's going on with the drug situation is this is what S is the ordinary supply of drugs were legalized. And the estimates are that marijuana habit would cost, marijuana is very cheap. It grows like a weed. It's not like asparagus. You have to take care of it. You sort of just put the seed down. You have to back up because it sort of attacks you like Jack and the Beanstalk stuff. It's very, very cheap. A marijuana cigarette would be, I don't know, a penny or two or something, and a weekly habit would be $5. So if it were legal, it's $5. Right now, when it's illegal, the main cost of it is not the marijuana itself, it's the fact that you go to jail if you smoke it, or if you produce it, or if you distribute it, and the same thing for cocaine and heroin. It's something like, well, you hippies ought to know. You druggies probably know better than I don't do that stuff. No, I don't. $30? $30? No way. It's more like $1,000.
For what, a cigarette?
No, not one marijuana cigarette for a heroin habit per week. It's much, much more. Lenny Bruce, one of my favorite characters, died not from a heroin overdose, but from impure heroin, sort of like the equivalent of bathtub gin. I mean, when we prohibited alcohol, we had the same sort of a thing. The alcohol isn't that expensive. The reason it was so expensive is the cops and bribes and shootings and stuff like that. Much, much more expensive. When we legalized alcohol, there's no alcohol problem. Yes, there's a medical alcohol problem. People get drunk and they should go to, Alcoholics Anonymous, or go to a therapist. It's a private medical problem. It's not a social problem. Nobody's being shot in the street over, alcohol. Whereas right now, I live in New Orleans. Every week there are 3 or 4 young black men who were shot. I went on a black radio TV show, Our Story. It's on the, the Mises Web, and I try to say that if you really wanted to save young black men's lives, let's legalize this stuff. Instead, they said, no, I tried Reductios on them with alcohol. I said, no, let's prohibit alcohol. I mean, I had a full head of hair before I started that show. And look at me now. It was just, I was pulling it out by the handful. The reason for the crisis is the prohibition. If we legalized it, it would be like alcohol. Look, they say that, I'm no medical person, but they say that marijuana is worse than cigarettes for your health. Cigarettes are worse than marijuana, and that some forms of alcohol are worse than cocaine. I don't know. I'm just speculating about this. But they're both very dangerous substances, and I don't think it's a good idea to overindulge in either of them. But the point is that the reason we have this crisis is because of the prohibition. And if we got rid of the prohibition, we would, we'd have some sanity. We wouldn't have people shooting each other in the streets. I admit the one bad thing about this is we wouldn't have as interesting movies. Because, half the movies are about drug running, and what would the FBI do on TV if they didn't have prohibition of, but, okay, so I concede. You see how moderate I am? I'm conceding a point. I'm conceding a point for the other side. So, the drug situation is that the free enterprise situation is that we should legalize drugs, and if we legalize drugs, the crisis would go away. We would, they say, well, if we legalized it, they'd be pushing it on the street corner or on the schoolyard. Well, that's what they do now. Because if they give it to you for free, then they can jack up the prices very high, right? Whereas who goes to the schoolyard and pushes alcohol? Nobody does. I mean, if we prohibited chocolate, we'd have the same problem. You'd have people killing each other over chocolate. And people going to the schoolyards, hey kid, you want some chocolate? You get hooked on chocolate and then you charge them an arm and a leg for chocolate. So it's got nothing to do with the substance. It's rather the prohibition. Okay, the next subject that I want to address is body parts. What's going on with body parts? How many of you people have signed on that little thingy such that if you die, they can come take your body parts? Raise your hands. Now, there are about, 100 people in the room, and about 10 people have signed on. I'm trying to make a supply curve. So I now have a dot on my supply curve. Namely, 10 people have signed on at a zero price. Okay, now you 10 people roughly that just raised your hand, don't raise your hands anymore. How many of you would sign if I said, I'll give you $100 for signing it? Now again, what this signing means that if you die in a motorcycle accident, you know what they call a motorcycle? Donor mobile. Why? Because young people ride motorcycles, and my body parts, they're falling apart. But you guys at age 22, you've got some good body parts there, and we want them. So the signature means that if you die by accident, and we'll get into people grabbing your body parts, they have TV shows about that. If you die purely by accident, and my company, the Acme company, now owns your body. Okay, now I'm going to give you $100 to sign that thing that these people did for free. How many new people want to sign on? I got another 3 suckers. Okay, so now we have, say, 15 people. And this was 0, and this I said was $100. Okay, I'm now offering $1,000, and nobody who's raised his hand, raise your hand again. Now offering $1,000 to sign this. Look, after you're dead, you don't really need your body parts, and we can still bury the rest of you. We're just taking a kidney and a heart and whatever else we think, blood, eyes maybe. But the rest of you goes in, and now you got $1,000 right now. You can go out and buy Socialized Medicine insurance. No. How many would now sign? Okay, I got another couple. And you see, you can see where I'm going with this. So don't hold out, waiting for the. Okay, so at $1,000, I've got maybe 25 people. So we have another point on the supply curve, and now I'm offering $10,000, which is serious moolah. Any more takers? Okay, I got another bunch of people. So what we have is a supply curve of offering body parts. Now, there are two ways to get body parts. One is cadaverous body parts. When you die, we grab them, and if we can get to you within 5 minutes of your death, the body parts are still okay. The other one is, Larry White, a famous semi-Austrian economist, had a kidney problem. He's a little weak on fractional reserve banking, a little weak on this. He's horrible on socialist roads, but I didn't get to do my socialist road thing. But I've got a whole chapter on him in my book on socialist roads, or privatizing roads. He's pure evil on that. In any case, but he's a nice guy. He's a friend of mine. He's just a little weak on some things. He's sort of an Austrian economist. He had kidney failure. He had to go to a kidney dialysis machine every day for 2 or 3 hours, and it was not a pleasant experience. He asked his siblings if they were a match. They weren't. He got a first cousin, got a kidney into him, and now he's walking around. He has to take a few pills, and he can't, get into the ring for 10 rounds of boxing. But he's fine. He's giving lectures on whatever. He's a professor now. He's leaving UMSL, and he's going to Mason. He's got a life. Whereas before, if you're spending 5-6 hours a day on a kidney dialysis machine, you don't have much of a life. There was this guy Mourning, I forget his first name, a basketball player. Alonzo Mourning, who also had a kidney that he needed. We have 2 kidneys. We only need one. So if your cousin or your brother can give you one, they can still survive, and now you've got a life. The economics of it are that there are, just with kidneys, there are 80,000 people a year who need kidneys. And this is just kidneys. We're not talking blood. We're not talking about eyes. We're not talking about other body parts that could be used. And only 20,000 kidneys because, remember the supply curve that we just did? We're restricted to a zero price. It's illegal to offer a price. There was some guy whose 4-year-old son needed a liver, and he put an ad in the paper, I'll pay $1 million for a liver. And you know what happened to him? They threw him in jail for having the audacity to try to use the market to save this little baby boy's life. This is where we're at with medical socialism in the present system. This is how far removed we are from the free enterprise system. Under the free enterprise system, you would have, this demand curve should be a lot more inelastic. I should draw it something like this. And here's the 80,000, and pretty much everyone would have a kidney. Because if the price weren't high enough, if there were still some people that needed kidneys that didn't get them, the price would go higher until you people would sign these things. But no, it's impermissible to use such a low, disgusting thing as a free enterprise system for an important issue like body part transfers. Okay, now there is this argument, well, if we legalized it, we would have people coming and grabbing up body parts. The argument, and this is another TV motif. By the way, if we legalized it, we'd also ruin TVs because a lot of the medical shows are centered on, will the little girl get her heart? And this guy who's dying, and there's a race through the streets, and the way they do it now is really despicable. They do it on the basis of, do you smoke? If you smoke, you're not getting a body part. And if you're of a certain age, you don't get it, no matter how rich you are. Even if you're Bill Gates, if you're the wrong age, you're not getting one. Although there was this case of some very rich man who put his name on the list of 100 different places, and you have to go to each of them, but he was rich enough to go to them, so you can sort of get around it a little bit, but money doesn't help. And what's the point of getting rich if you can't get things like this? Okay, so the argument is that if we went to point A, namely the free market point, people would grab your bodies. I remember seeing on one of the shows that somebody, grabbed somebody. I grab David, and I knock him out, and I grab his kidney, and I run away. And I leave him on a park bench bleeding. Well, it could happen. It could happen. This price, I don't know what the price would be, but the point is that right now, it's more danger of happening now based on supply and demand analysis than right now, than under a free market system. You see, under a free market system, the price would be A. But at present, what is the free market price or the black market price? It's B. You see, what you have to do is draw a vertical line from the point of how many kidneys the market supplies at a zero price, and when you do that, you get to point B. So, to those who object to a free market in kidneys on the ground that people will grab kidneys, the point is that it's more dangerous now than it would be under the free market system. Yes, it could happen in either case, but under freedom it would happen less likely because the price is lower. A is lower than B. Okay, the next thing I want to do is this breast milk business. Nestle got in trouble for breast milk. What happened was there are things called breast milk substitutes, powder, and what you do is you mix it with water. And Nestle gave it around, in North America it's fine. But they had the audacity to bring this product to Africa. And in Africa, the water is crummy. So when the women mixed the breast milk substitute with water, the babies got sick after a while. And since they weren't nursing, the breast milk dried up, and there was horror situation. And guess who was at fault? Nestle. Of course, Nestle is evil. They're trying to make profits off of the helplessness, they're greedy, the usual. But look, the breast milk substitute, the powder was fine. No one ever said that the powder was bad. It was the water. And I'll give you two guesses as to who was supplying the water in Africa. It's a multiple choice. Government or private? Well, it was the goddamn government that was supplying the water. So it's their fault. And now, over here we have these bottles of water. Lou is politically incorrect. You're not supposed to have bottles of water because bottles of water are greedy or something. You're not supposed to charge for water. The latest hippy-dippy left watermelon thing, red on the inside, green on the outside, is bottled water is evil. Well, of course bottled water is evil. It's capitalist water. It's secure water. Whereas you go to the government reservoirs and you know what you're getting. It's an adventure. So, okay, the last thing I want to do is the question of forced inoculations. Now, forced inoculations really don't belong in, don't really belong in this lecture. They belong in my lecture on external diseconomies. How many of you were here for that one? Just a few. Boy, there's a big overlap. Okay, what's going on? There was this woman called Typhoid Mary, and she was working in a cafeteria and she was spreading typhoid disease. Is she a murderer? No, because to be a murderer you have to have mens rea, you have to have a purposeful intent to kill. She was totally innocent. She didn't realize she had it. She just spread it. Now, I'm not a medical person, so I don't know if you can spread this by coughing or not, but if you could spread it by coughing, what would we do in the free society, whether we had a limited government or private market defense agencies? What would we do with a woman who, when she coughs, kills people? We'd quarantine her. We'd quarantine her because she's not a murderer, but she's a killer, right? I mean, she's engaging in uninvited border crossings. It's like punching people or raping people. She's doing it inadvertently. It's sort of you sleepwalk and then you rape somebody. I'm going to rape you by sleepwalking. If I do that, I'm innocent. I wake up, me, I didn't do it, blah, blah, blah. But I did it. So you got to stop me, right? Now, if, with regard to forced inoculations, if you didn't get an inoculation and you were like Typhoid Mary, then we'd make you get the inoculation. Or we'd quarantine you. It sounds a little harsh. But the burden of proof is on he who wants to initiate violence. You just can't say, well, maybe there's a chance, there's a percentage chance. Where's the young lady I was talking to about that? Yeah, this young lady brought this up and we were having a chat about that, and that's why I thought I'd bring this up. It's an interesting medical kind of an issue. Now, Murray Rothbard wrote this magnificent piece. Remember, this is, the way I see it, it's not really a medical problem, it's more an external diseconomy problem. Murray wrote this piece that I recommend very highly to just Google the Mises Web, Rothbard, and air pollution. And you'll get Murray's magnificent essay on environmentalism, which I think is the best thing that's ever been done on environmentalism. And what Murray says is what's your name? Henry. If I take Henry and I punch him, I'm guilty. But if I do something that maybe 20% of the time ends up with him having a sore arm, that's very different. You can't use violence against me for that, because look, right now, the age sex cohort that is guilty for most crimes are males aged 13 to 19, right? Let's stipulate that that's true, that a disproportionate amount of crime is done by males 13 to 19. So if you buy this percentage stuff, like, does smoking cigarettes cause cancer? Well, there's a correlation, but it's not like a one-to-one punch. It's some people smoke 20 packs a day for 90 years and then they die of old age. Other people breathe in and they die of cancer from secondary smoke. It's a percentage thing. So what Murray is saying is you can't indict people for a percentage crime. It has to be a direct crime. Because if you could indict people for a percentage thing, like if I do something, there's more likelihood of something bad happening, well then what we would do is take every 12-year-old boy and put him in jail and let him out when he was 20. Which is not exactly congruent with libertarianism. It's close, but not really. Now what about people who are allergic to peanuts? I chew peanuts. I don't spit it at them. I just chew peanuts and they keel over. Well, Murray's point is, look, if the law has to be for normal people. If you're the type of person that needs an oxygen tent to survive, don't go outside without one and expect everyone else to act in such a way that you don't need the oxygen tent. In other words, if you have special needs of this sort, peanuts, oxygen, whatever, the burden is on you to, care for yourself. You can't stop me from eating peanuts because eating peanuts is not per se an uninvited border crossing for normal people. I breathe out carbon dioxide and you breathe it in. You need an oxygen tent, and, too bad. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you. We still have a few minutes for questions. Guy in the blue?
I was having a debate with a friend on healthcare. He stated this fact that 95% of all cancer drugs...
95% of all what?
Cancer drugs.
Cancer drugs were?
Were subsidized by the government. I don't know if that's fact, but he was like, well, that means government, we have to have a smarter government that we can't afford since they have already done all this innovation for cancer drugs.
Well, look, the people like Richard Epstein, socialists like him, are always trying to tinker and fix this and that, and they're not radical in saying, let's have a free market. Young lady over here, you had a hand up? No? Brown top? Yeah.
Earlier, yeah. So when you were talking about the doctors who had only been...
Can you help me out on this, Maria?
No, if they come here, they have to do a whole residency from, start from zero.
Oh, really?
And they have decided to do that.
Oh, okay.
They don't just come in here and get a license. And you don't just get a United States license. Every single state makes you go through hoops. You get a license in that state, and it's different amounts of money, it's all this paperwork, and it's, you can't just go somewhere and practice.
This cousin of mine that I'm mentioning, the first year he applied to medical schools, he applied to 20 of them, and they all turned him down. The second year, he applied to every medical school in the country, several hundred. They all turned him down. The third year, he went off to Italy, and he got his degree. And then he came back, and they wouldn't let him practice, and he had to hire lawyers, and it took 2 or 3 years for him to be able to do it. So the restriction on entry isn't perfect. You can get through if you really go berserk by doing your residency over or by suing the bejesus out of them. But it is a restriction a very serious restriction on entry. The guy in the way in the back?
I'm just why the government has a deal.
Well, in the early days of antitrust, they would go against unions. They would sue unions for restraint of trade. But, we're a progressive society. We can't do that. Look, if the Treasury Department that is against fraud were to really go against fraud, they'd arrest the people in the Fed. If the antitrust people were serious, they'd arrest the post office or the AMA. They're not serious, is the answer. Yeah?
How would you get rid of large unions?
How would you get rid of large unions? Yeah. Well, unions deserve a 15-minute answer. I'll give you a 15-second answer. The unions are not per se contrary to libertarianism, only if they restrict entry. But you can have a voluntary association that engages in a mass quit and doesn't try to preclude scabs from getting in. That would be legitimate. I once did a little research to see if there were any free market unions, and I came across this thing called CLAC, C-L-A-C, Canadian Labour Association of Canada, which was a religious one, oriented one. And I said, well, would you beat up scabs? Oh, no, turn the other cheek. And I said, well, what do you think about Canadian labor legislation? Oh, we're in favor of it to force the employer to deal with them. There are no voluntary unions that I've been able to find out. So while theoretically a union could be compatible with the market, there aren't any. Guy in the black?
I just want to clarify, the difference between licensing and what you talked about being certified. Being certified basically says, okay, it's based on what you can call what you can call yourself, but not someone.
No. A license, if you don't get the license, you can't practice, and you try to practice, they throw you in jail. A CPA is a certified public accountant, and they are certified to do certain things. But if you're not certified, you can just be a public accountant and do accounting for other people that don't require a CPA. So it's the difference between a CPA, which is just certified, not a license. There's no LPA. Licensed public accountant is only certified. So we would put medicine on the footing of accountancy. I think my time is up.